What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the In-situ Health and Fitness Podcast. On today's episode, I have Jessica joining me for an interview. And yes, as you've probably guessed by the podcast title, Jessica is a bodybuilder. I had to get Jessica on to share her approach to bodybuilding. Those long-term listeners will know that Mac and I are all about health, longevity, looking after your body so you live a long, healthy and happy life. And Jessica uses all that in her approach to bodybuilding. But not only that, to hear what Jessica has actually been through and how she used that to drive herself to achieve her goals is an amazing story in its own. So make sure you hang around, listen to the whole lot, and I know you're going to get something out of this. So make sure you head over to Jessica's Instagram and share a bit of love. You'll find her at a little bit of Jessica.hereIam. You'll find that in the show notes. Head over to Jess's Instagram, give her a follow, make sure you give her a message and let her know that you heard her on this podcast. This was Jessica's first podcast. She absolutely killed it. Again, a big thanks to Jessica for sharing her story and going into so much detail. Not too many people would be comfortable doing that, but Jessica did. So a big thanks to her. This was a long podcast. I have broken it up into two parts for you guys. Part 2 will be dropping next Friday, so make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And I am going to get Jessica back on because we touched on a lot of topics, good topics, that I know you guys would love us to dive deeper into. I've got about 8 points here that I want to follow up with her. So eventually we'll get back on for round 2, and I'll leave it there. Let's get into the podcast. Well, thanks for jumping back on. I've seen that you had some good news during the week. You're presenting some medals?
Yes, I will be presenting medals at the next WBFF show in November, which is super exciting. I was initially going to just go and watch the show.
Yeah.
And then my coach reached out to me a couple of days ago and she was like, do you want to present medals? And I was like, fuck yes.
So what does that mean?
So just for every division that jumps up on stage, when they hand out first, second, third place, I'll get up and I'll present the medals to those winners.
Yes.
Yeah, and also everybody gets a participation medal as well. So I'll hand out those to every competitor too. So
yeah.
Exciting.
Are you excited to be able to be a part of it, but without competing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's because I'm not competing again until April next year. It gives me kind of like a little checkpoint to just keep me a bit motivated to, stay in shape and want to look good for that day. So yeah. And I mean, there are so many people that are going to be competing in November that I look up to. So seeing them and getting to meet them is going to be such an experience.
Yeah, nice. How many comps are there per year?
There's usually around 3. So they do a Gold Coast show in April, they do a Sydney show in July, and then they do another Gold Coast show in November.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So the November one, so what is that? April and July, they're both amateur shows, but then the November show is both amateur and pro.
Okay. Do you find everybody competes in all 3, or is it just you sort of pick and choose?
You kind of pick and choose, I guess, because nobody can stay in a prep for a whole year.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Yeah.
But a lot of people do tend to, they might compete in season A, like say April, they'll take a break and then compete again in November. Mm-hmm. Others might do July and then go to November, but generally they won't do all 3. They might do maybe 2 within the year. But it just depends on how close the shows are. A few of the girls that competed in Worlds a few weeks ago, they're going to jump back on and do the November show as well, because it's only, I think it was about 4 not 4 weeks, that August. So they competed at Worlds in August, and now they'll jump back on for November. So that way there's not too long of like extra prep, and then they'll probably take a break until later next year.
Yeah, sweet. So is just off topic a little bit, but what's the prize pool for the one in November?
So
if you win the top category,
Good question. I'm not 100% sure, other than the medal. And if you're a pro athlete and you're competing, so as a pro athlete, you need to compete against other pros. You can't compete against amateurs. And if you win your pro division, you'll often get a crown. So you'll be like the Australian champion. So crowns are given out to Aussie champions, and also if you were to compete at Worlds and take out first place in Worlds, you'll win a crown. But generally it's the status that you'll win. So if you're an amateur, you'll probably win your pro card, or, you know, of course, your first, second, third place medals. And I mean, sometimes you do get sponsorships from those placings. It just depends on whether or not sponsors reach out to you.
So what top percent of athletes can actually make a living from bodybuilding?
Oh, it's not many, not
Yeah.
many. Yeah. I wouldn't even say it's bodybuilding itself that will help them make a living. It's more their social media presence and their following more than
Yeah.
anything. Of course, with that you get sponsorships as well, which helps to make a living. But I mean, a lot of people who are in bodybuilding and make a living from it, they've got a few sponsorships going on. They've probably got a YouTube channel running. They've probably got a podcast. A lot of them have clothing lines, or they run their own coaching business. So there's always a side hustle. I don't think you can really make a career out of bodybuilding itself unless, you know, I guess you're someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, where you're kind of the exception to the rule. A lot of bodybuilders tend to have side hustles that help them. And of course, bodybuilding, it does help you get the exposure, but you've got to kind of utilize that exposure yourself to make the most of it.
Yeah, 100%. That seems to be the go with most sports these days that haven't got huge budgets like, all the big ones like basketball, golf, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All right. How about you introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and what you do?
Okay, so my name is Jessica Stevanovic. I am 28 years old. I come from Canberra. I am a public servant. And so while that is my, I'd say, 80% of my life, the other 20% is very much focused on health, fitness, and bodybuilding. Whenever I'm not at work, I'm at the gym pretty much, or if I'm not at the gym, I'm at home doing steps on my treadmill, or I'm meal prepping. My life kind of revolves around fitness nowadays. And I mean, I do enjoy other things. Like I like to go out kayaking. I was in a rowing team for a little while. I enjoy hiking, anything outdoors, camping, rock climbing. But yeah, so I like to consider myself to be a very active person, and anything that gets me moving, I love.
Love it. Sounds good. Love all that. So where did it all start? So obviously gym and all that sort of stuff. Growing up, what did you do? Were you always active, like you were saying, rowing, hiking, climbing?
Yeah, I was pretty active growing up. So from the age of, I think I was maybe 3 or 4, I started dance, and for majority of my life I have danced, all through high school, all through primary school. Mum put me through so many classes. I remember there was a time that when I was a kid, I was getting kind of fed up with it, and so I would refuse to participate in my dance classes, and they'd have to bribe me with Mars bars to get me to participate. It was terrible. But yeah, other than that, like I played netball growing up as well, did a little bit of karate, and then in high school I did cheerleading as well. And towards the end of high school, I started training in the gym, which I absolutely fell in love with. So how I got into that was, all my life, from the day that I was born, my dad has trained at the gym. He is a big, I would say, an advocate for bodybuilding. He never actually competed in a bodybuilding show himself, but he always maintained a physique that was pretty well something that you could go and compete with. I remember we were at a fitness expo one year and we were talking to Rich Gaspari and Hidetada Yamagishi, which are like, they're two pretty big bodybuilders. And they said to him, bro, do you compete? And he's like, no. And they're like, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, like
Unreal.
he was a big inspiration for me to get into training. And I started training by going to the gym, and he showed me, you know, what the machines do, what exercises to do. He pointed me to Dana Lynn Bailey, who I started watching on YouTube to start learning more about how to train and how to eat. And that was kind of what started it all. I think I was about 17 or 18, and then I've trained ever since.
What did that training look like back in the early days?
Was
it structured or just go in, do whatever you're feeling, or you watch the clip on YouTube?
Go in and do whatever I felt like. Of course, I'd, you know, kind of stick to the conventional training splits where I'll do, you know, push pull one day, legs another, like shoulders, back, legs, shoulders, legs. Yeah, so I didn't really know what I was doing back then until I decided to embark on my first competition in 2016. So I was kind of just in there for the fun of it. And then it wasn't until I engaged with one of the trainers at my gym in 2016, and I said, hey, I've seen some of the girls that you've coached in a competition. I'd like to give that a go. And she gave me a program. And from there, I feel like I learned a lot because I actually had more structure. And being a trainer at my gym, she would also run me through training sessions with her. So there was a lot that I learned about volume and tempo and how you can utilize that within your training.
How old were you then?
I was 20. Yeah, I was 20.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And where was that? So where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Newcastle. So I lived in Newcastle for the good first 21 or 22 years of my life. And then in, I think it was 2017. No, must have been 2018. 2018, I moved to Canberra.
Yep.
Yeah.
So obviously, like you just said, you didn't know too much. You were just training and doing what you feel like. And then you got a coach going into your first comp.
Yeah.
Can you remember back then what it felt like leading up into the first comp at 20 years old?
It was very daunting for one.
Yeah, I bet.
Because even though I'd been training for a few years, my diet at the time wasn't the best, and I put on some weight. And it was also around a time that, you know, my hormones had kind of set in after high school, and I'd noticed changes in my body and how my body holds fat. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I think I was maybe 6 or 8 weeks out from my competition. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to make it. Like, my legs are still holding too much body fat. And it was very, very scary at first, but I was so excited about it because, I mean, prior to engaging with that coach, I was training like at least 3 hours a day just because I loved being in the gym and I loved moving. I loved pushing myself. And, but for the majority of it, even though it was a bit daunting, I was so excited the entire time. Like, I was so motivated. Bodybuilding became my life. I mean, at the time I was working, I think it was 2 or 3 casual jobs. So where I lived, a lot of the work was very seasonal. it was pretty hard to get like full-time or part-time work because everywhere just wanted people for, you know, spring, summer. Things died down during winter. So unless you were like a tradie or you worked in a bank or childcare or something, there wasn't a whole lot of steady work. So that gave me a lot of flexibility having the 3 casual jobs. You know, I could turn down shifts when I wanted to. Obviously, I tried to work as much as I could because I wanted to, you know, make the most of what I was doing with my training, but also just, you know, cost of living and all of that. But I remember I was up, you know, early every morning. I was constantly moving. Thinking back to it, I'm like, I don't remember a time I ever sat still during that point, apart from when I went to bed. So yeah, I was very excited about it. Everything revolved around my comp. I was so like ingrained in my diet, my sleep and wake cycle. You know, I took probably like 50 different vitamins a day, and like I was just very, very driven. And I loved the process.
And you've just competed in your second one about a month or 2 months ago?
Yeah, so it was a month and a half ago. I competed in the middle of July. So this one was with a different federation. When I first competed in 2016, that was with IMBA, which I believe has now changed to ICN. And this one that I just did a month and a bit ago was with WBFF, which was a completely different experience because they are very different in how they structure their shows and also how the athletes present themselves is just mind-blowing, the difference.
And what category did you compete in this time around?
This time around, I competed in transformation. So over the past couple of years, I went through some rocky relationships. And from that, my mental health suffered a fair bit. So I think it was about 4 years ago now, I was married. And unfortunately, that relationship was very, very abusive and controlling. And after that one, I gained a lot of weight. And once I got out of that relationship, I started losing it again. And I ended up, I think it was around the 60 kilo mark. So I was quite small. And then I got into another relationship and I kind of maintained that weight throughout. And then that relationship ended, and that wasn't great for my mental health either. There was aspects of control in that one as well. So when I got out of it, not only was, I mean, I was head over heels with this guy, even though now that I look back at it, I'm like, oh, that probably wasn't healthy. That probably wasn't healthy. Yeah, now looking back at it, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, wasn't the best. And after it, I kind of just ate my feelings for, I'd say, a good 12 months. And during that time, we were going through COVID lockdowns. So I was ordering a lot of Uber Eats. There was a time when I was in isolation because I had COVID myself, and my kitchen bench was covered in Uber Eats bags. You couldn't see the bench top, and I couldn't take the rubbish out to the bin because I was in isolation. I live in an apartment building, so it's a shared space. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of disgusting. And then I think it was kind of from that point, I was like, you know what? I need to do something about this. And I, during that time, I'd fallen off my training a bit. I didn't want to leave the house. My friends had to come and take me out shopping or take me out to dinner just to get me out. And so I started getting back in the gym. My diet still wasn't great, which I guess now thinking back to it, I feel like I kind of needed to go through that to set me on the path that I am now. There were a lot of things that I learned. And once I started to feel happier without making any changes to my diet or my training, like just my mental state. Once my mental state started to improve, that's when I noticed my diet started to improve. I started to get more excited about my training again. There was a long time there where I was just going through the motions in the gym. I wasn't really kind of committed to what I was doing. And yeah, once my mental health improved, everything kind of flowed from there. And it wasn't really until the end of last year that I found myself in a really good place mentally. And I was like, you know what? I want to take this a little bit further and put myself down for a competition and give myself that extra push. So
Yeah, nice. There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah.
So can we dive into the relationships just a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
So the marriage, was that a one-sided separation, or did you both just sort of fall out of love as such?
That was a one-sided separation. That was me. I left that one because of the abuse and the control. So during the course of that relationship, there was a time that I even gave up my gym membership because I was the only person in the relationship that was working the entire time that we were together. And I couldn't afford to pay for 2 gym memberships, and he was right into it. So, I mean, I didn't want to give up my membership, but he kind of manipulated me into doing so. And I'd still go to the gym on occasion. Like, I'd pinch the tag every now and again and go in for a training session, but it definitely wasn't consistent. I was lucky to maybe go in there once or twice a week. And as a result, like, I started gaining a lot of weight because I'd also sacrificed my diet. At one point I was originally ordering like food from a meal plan company. So all my food was prepped and ready to go, but then that got too expensive, me paying for that, plus having to support him. So that was something I gave up, and it turned into, cheap crap like 2-minute noodles and meat pies, and snowballed from there. But yeah, I left that relationship as a result because I was tired of being treated like rubbish. I didn't like how I looked and what I'd become, and it's a little bit heavy, but I was verging on the point of taking my own life, so I needed to get out of there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So no, I want to dive into bodybuilding, what it takes to do bodybuilding, but to leave a relationship like that takes a lot of guts. It's I'm sure most people listening have been in a relationship like that, and you just feel stuck and you can't get out.
Oh, absolutely. When I did leave, I had to get the police involved because I was petrified. And this is a crazy thing. And I just want to touch on it because I feel like some of your listeners can probably, take something away from this. But when I tried to leave, he did become physically abusive. And so I got the police involved. Anyway, once I did that, he tried to flip it onto me and say that I was the one that was physically abusive to him. And he had a friend vouch for him. I had nobody. So I was terrified. And he did that to try and get me to drop the charges, which I ended up doing because I was just like, I work in a government job. I can't have that on my record. Like, I haven't done anything wrong. I've got no one to, speak for me other than myself. He's already got this friend who is vouching for him when, it's just a flat out lie. And so that was really, really scary. And so the way that I ended up getting out of it, thankfully, I organized to move my stuff during my lunch break at work one day because apparently he had a full-time job at this time. So I was like, okay, well, he should be at work then. I'll go collect my stuff and get out of there. I also didn't have any money to my name because he would wake up before me on my payday, go onto my phone, sign into my internet banking, and transfer
Holy
all of
shit.
my money out of my account and into his, so I could
Far out.
it. Yep. So I ended up having to change my bank details at work. And so I had one paycheck to my name, which wasn't quite enough to help me move. So thankfully, my parents were able to at least help me get a removalist truck. And then all I needed to do was just organize some furniture for myself. So I moved into a share house. But yeah, so I went to move my stuff during my lunch break, and it was so crazy. I thought, okay, he has this full-time job, he should be at work. But I had this voice in the back of my head. I'm like, I really don't think this job exists, because that was something that he lied about throughout the relationship. There were like 3 different jobs that he apparently had. I never saw pay slips. I never saw a work uniform. There was a time I gave him money to purchase work gear because he was going to start a fly in, fly out job with the mines. I never saw that. I never saw any of the work gear, never saw any boots, any pants, any tops. Anyway, I was coming home on my lunch break, and I pulled into the driveway, and I sat outside, waited for the removalists, and while I was waiting, he comes walking up the driveway with his friend. And I'm like, oh, okay, full-time job, huh? And he's like, oh, no, I'm off today. I'm like, okay. Anyway, thankfully he didn't make too much of a fuss because the removalists were there. So I was able to just get my stuff and get out. But like even that, like that set my heart racing. But I just wanted to make that point that even though you might feel like there is no way out, there is. It might be scary. It might be downright petrifying. But if your life is on the line, you need to get out of there, because once you do, your quality of life is going to skyrocket. Like I was in a really dark place at that time, and I am so incredibly glad that I did not let him win, because my life has just flourished ever since. So yeah, just something for your listeners. And
Yeah.
it's also been a big motivator for me in my bodybuilding journey, because part of it's also just like a fuck you, look what I'm doing now. You lose. See you
Yeah.
later.
Oh, my heart was racing just you telling me that story. So coming out of a place like that and getting back to normality, talk us through that.
Okay, that was challenging. By that time, I was probably sitting around the 95 kilo mark from memory, which is quite heavy for me, because I'm relatively short. I think I'm only 5'3", maybe 5'4". And so on my frame it was quite a lot of weight, and I ended up with sleep apnea as well from that. And so I definitely wanted to reclaim my life, reclaim myself again. So I started to clean up my diet. I got my gym membership back, started training 5 to 6 times a week again, and just really was adamant on just turning that around. And not only for my physical health, but my mental health as well, because I find that when I'm exercising, I'm my happiest. Like if I'm not training, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. I don't feel like me when I'm not actively in the gym or working towards a goal, I guess you could say.
Were you working towards a goal? Because like a lot of the time when people are down in the dumps, I just say, go to the gym and just doesn't matter what you do, just do something. Because we get like people get so obsessed with chasing a goal. Like I only go to the gym to achieve this goal, or I need to do this workout because it's going towards this. But a lot of the time, it's just good to go to the gym and move your body.
Oh, absolutely. Then I didn't really have a goal like set in stone, other than like I just wanted to lose a certain amount of weight. I didn't set a date to it or anything like that. It was just more so that I wanted to get my body moving. I wanted to live a healthier lifestyle, and I wanted to get back to where I was before that relationship. And yeah, I guess it wasn't it wasn't something that I was pushing for too much, but I really, like, at that point in time, hikes were like my thing. Every weekend I was out at a different hiking spot. Like during the weekend I would train at the gym, but then every weekend I would hike for like 20 kilometers every Saturday or Sunday, just because I loved it. I loved the exercise. I loved the sunshine. Like, I love being outdoors and just getting my body moving. And I mean, you don't have to have a goal just to get yourself exercising. It was really great for your mental health, just to, like, even if you don't get outdoors and exercise, even just in the gym, your body releases hormones while you're training, and those hormones are responsible for how you feel in general.
100%. I lived in Canberra for a few years.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
About 10, or maybe longer than 10 years ago.
Oh,
I
cool.
loved hiking around Canberra. There's some good hikes.
Yes.
Where was your favorite?
My favorite was at Molonglo Gorge, which is just outside of Queanbeyan. It's a beautiful dirt track that runs alongside the Molonglo River, and at the end there's a nice picnic area. And I'd usually pack a lunch or something, maybe take some firewood with me, and then once I get to the end, I'd set up myself a little fire and have my lunch, and it was just a nice way to spend the day. And that was a good I think it took me probably about 6 hours to do that full hike to the end and back.
Are you by yourself doing these?
Yes, I was a lot of the time.
I think people underestimate how good that is especially when you're trying to find yourself again. And people are very afraid to spend some time alone with themselves and their thoughts.
Yes.
Was that same for you, or did you just? I guess you grew up doing it, so you knew what was sort of coming your way.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. Like, I've always been pretty, like, content with my own company, I would say. So I mean, at first it was a bit uncomfortable because I was in relationships for a lot of my life. So being properly alone for the first time, it felt a bit weird. But as soon as I started getting out of those hikes, I was like, wow, like, this is actually really great. I would charge up my little Bluetooth speaker, have that sitting in my backpack, playing music while I'm walking. Instead of having headphones in, because then I could hear my surroundings as well, which was always really nice, hearing the running water of the river and the birds and all of that. So that was really like a cathartic thing that I started doing for myself. And like, even halfway through the hike, I might get a bit hungry, so I would climb to like a rock that was in the middle of the river, so I was surrounded by the water, and just sit there and have a snack, listen to the music, lay in the sun. And it was like, I think it was a really, really good way to kind of come back to me after having that kind of stripped away from me for so long. Yeah.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So coming out of that time, getting back into the gym, at what point did you start taking the gym more seriously? Like,
for a long, so after I left marriage, I was single, not for very long, probably about 4 months, I think it was. And then I started dating again. And during that second relationship, so that was about 2 years. During that 2 years, I was still training in the gym, constantly pushing for PBs. But it was all just a lot more for the enjoyment of it and just getting my body moving. And so I didn't really start getting serious about it again until maybe the last 6 months that I was in that relationship. And at that point, I was looking at doing another bodybuilding show with the WBFF. So initially, so this was in 2020, I was going to compete with WBFF. I started a prep, I'd engaged with a coach. That relationship fell apart, not as a result of the prep or anything. There were just differences in the relationship. And when that relationship fell apart, I then stopped prepping and gained the weight again. But so that last 6 months, I started to get serious about it again. But in saying that, I wasn't doing that for me at that point. And I think that's why this last prep that I did was successful and I saw it through, aside from, obviously the breakup issues. But I was doing it for me this time, whereas last time that I tried to go into the prep, it was kind of like a last attempt at saving that relationship.
Why do you think that is?
So he was very heavily into the gym. He was very into bodybuilding. He was quite a big guy. He'd never competed, but he'd always thought about it. And he was pretty strict with his diet and all of that. And during that time, I gained a little bit of weight, not much. It was only like 5 kilos, but he made a big deal out of that 5 kilos. And so I was like, okay, I need to get in better shape. Otherwise he's going to leave me. Like, if I don't get my shit together, like, because whenever I went to visit him, so he lived in Sydney, I lived in Canberra, so it was long distance. I'd go and visit on weekends. And whenever I saw him on a weekend, we'd go out and have a big cheat meal. We'd go out at a different burger joint every weekend and we'd get burgers and fries and dessert and shakes. And that eventually started to catch up with me. He could get away with it. He's a big boy. And me, not so much. And I didn't gain a whole lot of weight for it because I was still training a lot. And during the week, I was dieting pretty strictly. I remember there was a point that I went to my GP for a checkup and he was like, "Oh, you're in ketosis." And I'm like,
Far out.
I wasn't even trying to be in ketosis, but during the week, my carbs were so low that was where I ended up.
Shit.
And yeah, so I mean, during that relationship, when I started to put on it was only a little bit of weight. 5 kilos isn't a whole lot.
No.
But he was like, "Okay, here's a diet plan." I'm like,
Oh.
"Okay, that's all right. I'll take it because I don't want you to leave me. I'll do my best. Try and lose the weight. I'll do what you say." And yeah, so that's where the controlling side of it came in with the relationship. Other than that, like, like I said, I was head over heels for the guy for so many other reasons, but that was just one thing that was like, yeah, now that I think back on it, wasn't great. And yeah, like even when I was with him, I think my lightest when I was him was around 59 kilos, which is pretty light. Like I can deadlift double that. And so when I did gain the extra 5 kilos, I was only sitting around the 64, 65 kilo mark. But to him, I don't know why, but he just made a big deal of that. But then again, I have thought about it since, and I'm like, he was really hard on himself with his own physique, even though I thought he looked phenomenal. So maybe it was kind of him rubbing off onto me in a way, like he was, what do you call it?
Sort of projecting his own insecurities.
Exactly, yeah, projecting. That was the word that I was looking for. I think. Yeah, so anyway.
So just randomly, but was there a weigh-in each week, or like what was happening there? How did he actually?
Oh yeah, no, yeah, he'd ask me for my weight. He would ask me for my measurements. There were times that I'd go over and visit, and he'd get the calipers out, and we do skull testing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So like he knew everything that was going on with my body, and yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like just for me, looking at that, because like ketosis, I know it's a bit of a buzzword and a fad type thing, but that's the last point before your body actually dies. Ketosis is the last basically defense your body has before you die. And yes, you can get there and be safe and do it properly, but to get there unknowingly, like of course your body's going to, like, especially as a female, of course your body's going to fluctuate in weight like week on week. Like crazy.
Pretty insane. Yeah. And like, I mean, obviously a lot of people do strive to reach ketosis when they're on the ketogenic diet. I wasn't even trying to do
That's
that.
what I mean. Yeah.
And the diet that he'd put me on was just so low in carbs and I mean, just low. There wasn't much food in general. And yeah, so that was when the doctor told me that, I was like, okay, I kind of feel good about that because it's like, you know what? That means I'm burning my body fat. Like my body's using its body fat for energy. But then at the same time, it's like I wasn't even trying to do that.
Mm.
Maybe there's something up there like that's not exactly healthy. Especially when
Yeah.
I'm not, you know, eating high enough fats to
And like carbohydrate, everybody out there, carbs aren't bad.
yes,
Obviously,
exactly.
they're not bad for you. You can still eat carbohydrates and look good and feel good.
Absolutely.
And so how did that end? Again, like, was it mutual or one-sided?
No, it was one-sided. He was the one that left. And I think a lot of it was to do with I just wasn't matching him in the gym. I wasn't matching him with my diet, even though I was trying. Like I jumped into a prep, but I remember at the end, when I was in this prep, I was moving house, and I moved everything myself except for the bigger things. So the fridge, I had removalists move. The TV, oh, actually, no, I take that back. TV, I moved myself. So the fridge they moved in, my lounge they moved in, and I had a chest of drawers that the removalist did. But I did everything else myself. I moved my own washing machine myself without a trolley. I lifted this damn washing machine in and out of my car. Like I was determined. To save money, but also
So that's a stressful, just moving house is just stressful as it is.
So while I was moving house, sorry, I lost my train of thought
No, you're
there.
right.
While I was moving house, I spent, the whole weekend lifting everything in and out of the house, walking back and forth to and from the car. And so that weekend I didn't train.
Mm.
And I even checked in with my coach and said, hey, I'm moving house. Is it okay if I take a couple of days off training? I've moved everything myself. I am absolutely exhausted. And she's like, yes, of course, that's totally fine. But when I told him that I had taken 2 rest days while I've been moving house, he was like, you're in the middle of a prep. What do you think you're doing? That's just slack. You're not committed. And I was just like, bro, I asked my coach if it was okay. Like, come on. But it seemed like that was like the last little thing that kind of just pissed him off for some reason. And he was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I'm like, right, okay. But then also, it's only speculation because he never confirmed or denied it, but I'm fairly certain at that point he was cheating on me. There were things that I'd seen on socials only a couple of weeks later that were like, okay, you can't tell me that you guys aren't seeing each other. It was sketchy. And anyway, yeah, he never confirmed it, but I'm fairly certain at that point he had been unfaithful. Because the reasons that he gave me for leaving were kind of rubbish. It was just like, okay, they're just really poor excuses. Like, there's got to be more to it that you're not telling me because this just doesn't seem right. But anyway, so that also took a hit to my self-confidence because, I mean, this other girl, she was way into CrossFit. She was really fit. And also just the whole unfaithful side of things, it just made me feel like a bag of dicks, if I'm being completely honest. Like that took a hit to me, which I think is part of the reason why I kind of self-sabotaged after that and just ate and ate and ate. Even though, I wanted to look better, I went in the opposite direction. I still haven't worked out why I went that way, but I guess, I mean, it is what it is. And I've turned it around since then, but I guess it was just my coping mechanism.
Yeah. That's fair. So what was the turnaround look like?
Okay. So after that, I did a lot of moping for probably a good 6 months. Didn't leave the house a whole lot, trained every once in a blue moon. But
And this was during COVID when you had
yes.
all the takeaway on your counter and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was. And so that was part of the turning point. I was just like, okay, this is a really bad habit to be getting into. Not only is it, making me gain weight, but it's costing me a fortune to, constantly be ordering Uber Eats. So that's something I need to cut out, clean up my diet. And I think the first step in that was the Uber Eats, because I was just like, you know what, this is expensive. And then just as a byproduct of cutting that out, I was already eating a lot healthier because I was, fruit and vegetables at the supermarket aren't expensive. So like that's what a lot of my diet turned into. I went back to meat, fruit and veg, simple, cut down my food costs by, at least I'd say maybe 3/4. I was spending close to $200 a week just on Uber Eats. And then, once I switched to buying from the supermarket again, I was spending maybe $50 to $80 a week instead. So that was the first kind of step. And then
was it hard to stop eating takeaway and go?
yeah, it was. Because I mean, a lot of the foods that I was having, they're, high in sugar, high in fats. They're, obviously very tasty to eat. So I mean, while fruit, veg, and meat and that can be tasty, the flavor doesn't quite match,
Yeah.
when you order out. So it was difficult because I did miss just all of that flavor, and I missed the sugar hits, and I guess you do kind of get addicted to some of those
Yeah, 100%. That's what they're designed for.
processed foods. Yeah. So it was difficult. I mean, I guess the way that I overcame that was just going back to kind of how I previously functioned. And I guess a lot of people hate the term like cheat meal or treat meal, but that was what I kind of defaulted to. And, I'd eat clean all week, and then on the weekend I'd maybe have dinner and a dessert. Like that was ordered out, which was a good starting point for me, because that way I still got those little treats there that still satisfied just that craving for the taste. And yeah, everything kind of just started to snowball from there. I started losing the weight again. It was very slow at that point because I wasn't actively trying to be in a calorie deficit or anything. I was just eating cleaner foods. And yeah, so it was kind of just like a slow progression from there. Getting back to the gym some more, kind of falling back in love with my training again, because I was like, okay, I want to start hitting some PBs again instead of just going through the motions. That's when I started really working on trying to get my deadlift weights up. And yeah, so that happened. But then I'd say maybe about 12 months after that breakup, I then started drinking a lot. And I think that was also a coping mechanism because I still wasn't quite over that relationship. And it kind of started from a friend's wedding. And then from that wedding, it was like every weekend or every 2 weekends after that, I was constantly going out drinking with friends. And it became a really bad habit. And it wasn't until the end of last year, so it was about 12 months of going out and drinking almost every weekend. And then it came to December, and I was like, you know what? I'm tired of this now. Like, I don't like how I feel. I don't like how I look, because even though my diet had been cleaned up, I wasn't eating in a calorie deficit, so I wasn't losing weight. And then obviously when I was going out and binge drinking on the weekends, I also ended up binge eating, because then I'd, be hungover the next day. And, for some reason, McDonald's is always the best cure for a hangover. So that's what I was eating the next day. And my weight just started climbing up from there. I was still training in the gym frequently, but because I wasn't eating in a calorie deficit and consuming so much alcohol. I mean, alcohol can put like a pause on your fat loss for a good 36 hours. And it also puts a pause on muscle gain for that 36 hours as well. So towards the end of last year, it got to a point where I was like, you know what? I'm a much happier person in general, but I'm not happy with my body, and I'm not happy with how I feel at the moment. Not mentally, but physically. Like, I was getting a lot of heartburn, a lot of indigestion, a lot of stomach cramps. And I was like, you know what? Okay, I need to turn this around. So it was around the start of December, I started to just clean up my diet and actively go into a calorie deficit. So I pulled out my old program from 2016 and started following that just to get me started on losing some weight. And then towards the end of December, I was like, you know what? I want to take it a step further, and I want to do a competition prep again. And thankfully, WBFF have the transformation division. So that was kind of a first stepping stone to getting back to competing again. So then start of January, I started in a comp prep to drop the weight to go into the transformation division for WBFF. And yeah, the weight started to fly off in the beginning, which was great. During that prep, so that was about 6.5 months, I lost 25 kilos. At the start, I lost 15 like within the first 2 months. But then after that, it really started to slow down once my body got to more of a set, like comfortable set point, I guess. And also I was on antidepressants for a long time, and towards the end of last year, when I was starting to feel like a happier version of myself, I decided to come off of those because I thought they were like, not they were, but my mental health was more circumstantial to like the relationships that I'd been in, the abuse, the control. And so I was like, you know what? All of that's gone now. So I'll come off of my antidepressants and see how I feel, because I feel like I'm in a better position now. But then halfway through this prep, I was like, oh, actually, you know what? Maybe it wasn't circumstantial, and it is just how my mind is. And so I got back on the antidepressants, and I feel like not only my body becoming at a more comfortable set point, but reintroducing those slowed down my weight loss progression because the medication that I'm on can actually cause weight gain. Thankfully, I haven't gained any weight because I have been in a calorie deficit and I've been training. But it definitely slowed things down. And I think that's something important for people to remember is if you are on medications that can cause weight gain, you might not lose weight as quickly as you would like. But it's not to say that you will definitely gain weight, but it can hinder in some ways. But if you're consistent and you are, doing everything right, you're in a calorie deficit, you're training hard, there's no saying that you can't lose weight even on these medications, because I'm proof of that. Like I still managed to, while it was frustrating seeing it slow down, I still got there. And I remember when I got back on the medication, I was freaking out. I was like, oh no, like I've just lost 15 kilos. I'm going to gain that all back. Like this is going to be a disaster. And I was like stressing about it. And I spoke to my coach, and I spoke to my GP as well. And my GP was like, look, even though it can cause weight gain, if you eat right and you exercise, you should be fine. So I was like, okay, I'll take that back to my coach, see what she says. And she was like, yep. Okay, good to know. We'll just keep doing what we're doing and see how you go. And thankfully, things still, tracked along. Not as quickly as I would have liked, but also didn't go backwards.
Hey guys, this is Mac again. Just one more thing before you leave, and that is 2-Minute Tuesdays. Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Tuesday that provides a little chicken nugget of information that I found useful and interesting, and that I think might also help you? It is about half a page long, intended to be a 2-minute read, kind of like a virtual record of my personal diet, exercise, productivity, and life epiphanies that I think would be useful to others and especially to you guys listening. So if that sounds like fun, again, very short, a tiny little insight to keep you motivated for the week and give you something to think about. And if you would like to try it out, just go to insitucollective.com/newsletter, drop in your email, and you will get the very next one. Again, that is in-situ collective.com/newsletter. It is completely free, and of course you can unsubscribe at any time. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.